Chapter 4, Teddy Bear. Teddy Bear Ashley, was sick of being locked away. The only reason he was in prison was because he had been caught with a bag of coke in his car, which wasn't even his. No one believed that, of course, but it was true. Someone had planted the drugs, and he had suspicions about who it was. It could have been his best friend, who, nearing the time of his incarceration, seemed to have a lot of animosity and bitterness towards Teddy over his promotion at the business company that they both worked at. Teddy knew that this friend always messed with the wrong crowd, so it could have been her. Teddy had always despised people in authority, so Rush rubbed him the wrong way constantly. The smug little bastard ran everything, and it was unfair. He had ruined so many people's lives, him and that asshole Nestor, who got off on the torment he gave to others. Teddy had only been locked away for 2 years so far, out of a planned 8. During his time in the Brooklyn Falls Penitentiary, he had seen people come and go and a lot left, not because of the end of their sentence, but because they were murdered. One time, some kid ratted out Rush's drug smuggling operation, and in return, Nestor got a funnel from the kitchen and poured boiling hot water down the kid's throat. He died in agonizing pain, and he was only 18 years old. Nestor would talk to his friends within Rush's posse, and he would talk about how horny it made him to kill, to look into the victim's eyes and see the sheer anguish, and to see the life leave them. Most of Rush's posse were nothing but sadistic psychopaths. Rush was the leader, with Nestor being his right-hand man. There was also many more, at least 25 in total. Teddy didn't know all their names, and he didn't care to. Hell, he didn't even know who all was a part of his group. That's what made Rush so dangerous. Talk shit about him in front of the wrong people, they'll have your head on a stick. Nigel Holt was a member of Rush's posse, and he seemed to be the more sane one of the bunch. He was a lot more calculated, and he knew how to manipulate people. His torment on others was in a mental capacity instead of a physical one. If Nestor was Rush's right-hand man, Holt was his left. There were a few others in the posse, such as Jimenez, Blakey, and Barr. He didn't know their first names, because they went strictly by a last-name basis. They weren't as bad as Nestor and Holt, but they were the ears of the operation, amongst dozens of others. They simply reported back to Rush, who then spread the word to his minions to do his dirty work. Paranoia had gone rampant throughout the prison, and everyone knew that freedom was potentially on the horizon. They would just have to survive another week in prison. Seemed easy enough. Most of them forgot about the fact that they would be permitted weapons and allowed to commit any crimes they wanted. They'd be lucky to survive the first 24 hours, let alone a week, especially with Rush and his minions running the male side of the prison. Teddy had no clue about the female side of the prison, but he assumed there was a similar hierarchy. There was one area that Teddy had found all thanks to Charlie. Charlie was a nutcase that everyone seemed to avoid, because he would pop a cap in your ass and then call it his divine right. However, one night, when Teddy had been in the same bunk as Charlie had gotten up in the middle of the night. Curious, Teddy followed him. Charlie went into the janitor's closet and shut the door behind him. He didn't come out for a while, so Teddy went and opened the door up. Charlie was nowhere to be found. That was when Teddy saw it, a secret door hidden underneath a shelf in the closet. He only noticed it because the shelf was moved so that Charlie could come back out when it was time. It was a crawl space underneath the prison. Teddy wondered if anyone else besides him and Charlie knew about this. Teddy quickly shut the door and left before Charlie noticed him. It all seemed sketchy to Teddy. What prison would have a crawl space easily accessible to the prisoners? Maybe they thought they had sealed it off. Who knew? The officers in the prison weren't the brightest bulbs in the shed. Sharpest tools, whatever term seemed most fitting. Point is, Teddy found them to be negligent to leave a hatch such as the one in the janitor's closet to be so accessible to the prisoners. Not that he minded much. It could come in handy eventually. He noted the secret hatch and went on about his business, not telling anybody else about it, just in case others began using it regularly. Then the secret hatch wouldn't be so secret anymore, and the officers would ensure it couldn't be used. Maybe it didn't even matter anymore, since Teddy was certain he wasn't going to survive very long in this prison war, especially with Rush and his gang around to run things. The secret hatch being exposed was the least of his worries at that moment. Chapter 5, Skinner. Leslie Skinner was 30 years old, and in her 30 years she had experienced a lot of injustice. The love of her life, whom she had met in college, had been nothing but a cheating, lying sack of shit. The only reason Skinner found out was through a mutual friend. She had been cooking dinner when she got the idea. The potato peeler had accidentally cut her while she was peeling the potatoes, and then she got the idea. She would make the cheating bastard pay. Of course, she was busted eventually. I mean, it's hard to get away with murder. After a long, lengthy, and drawn-out court case, Leslie Skinner was found guilty. She adapted to prison life fairly quickly. The head dog was named Maria Ortiz, and Skinner had picked a fight with her, knocking all of her teeth out in the process. Maria was eventually sent to the box after Skinner claimed that Maria had started it. After all, Skinner did have the bruises to prove it, which she had given to herself to further strengthen the validity of her claims against Ortiz. Ever since then, Ortiz was running away in the box while Skinner was running the women's side of the prison. She had her fair share of minions, but her main one was Eve Robertson. Eve was a good kid and was only 19 and gullible. Eve did absolutely anything she asked, and she was smart too. The reason Eve was in prison? Drug smuggling like half of the inmates. Eve always made sure people stayed in line around Skinner and always made sure they paid up for the stuff Skinner had given them. Of course, she had Carolina Hartman, who was of no use to Skinner anymore. Hartman was in the box after she had skinned that caned cunt for taking her spot in the shower. Skinner didn't derive sexual pleasure from her actions, but she did like the feeling of being dominant in this prison. She had never felt dominant before she was imprisoned in 2029, only the year prior. She had an abusive stepfather who constantly beat and raped her mother and also beat her. She grew up distrusting authority figures, and she decided that once she graduated, she would move out and go to college to become a psychologist to understand why her stepdad did what he did. She attended Orion University, which in recent years she heard had a bad reputation after a fraternity massacre occurred there in the fall of 22. However, she attended in 2019 before any of that mess had happened. There she met Michael Chang, her future husband. They had hit it off right away, and they got married in the fall of 2021. She was always happy with Michael. She didn't have to pretend around him, and she thought at the time that he was the love of her life. That is, until he cheated. Cheated on her like she was nothing, discarded and disposed of her, just like every man in her life ever had. Her real father left when she was born and wanted nothing to do with her. Her stepdad was a raging alcoholic whose favorite sport was beating the living shit out of his wife and stepdaughter, and now the love of her life was a cheating bastard. She had never been a dominant force in her life until prison, and here she could run things exactly how she wanted, and no one could ever hurt her again like her dad, stepdad, and her husband did. Never again. Skinner had an overall hatred towards men because of her experiences, and she was thankful that the male and female populations were separated. Men were nothing but disgusting, smelly, filthy, and putrid scum to her. They were nothing but a bunch of cheating, lying, and abusive rapists in her mind. And if she had it her way, she would kill every single last one of them, just like she had killed Michael. Chapter 6. Nestor. Nestor had come to know Rush through his years of imprisonment. An old dude had run the prison at one point, but he had died of a heart attack, and Rush fought for his dominance to be the alpha male. Nestor respected him for it. Nestor had a past just like Skinner, a dark, horrific past. His father had been a frequent buyer of snuff films, and at first he had been appalled and absolutely disgusted by the content of said films. However, Nestor began to find himself becoming sexually attracted to the content as well. Nestor eventually began to not only develop a fetish towards violence, but he also began experiencing homosexual tendencies, which he constantly repressed. His dad always called him a faggot for doing anything feminine. Eventually, when Nestor was 13, he and his dad had gotten into a massive argument, ending with his father dead at Nestor's feet. Nestor had never felt so much pleasure as when he stabbed his father in the chest. To hear his cold, wretched heart practically explode from the puncture, the man who had tortured him now had a tortured look in his eyes. Even thinking about it now, Nestor would get hard, just remembering the life leaving his father's eyes. He had been sent to juvie until the day he turned 18, and then he was sent to Brooklyn Falls Penitentiary. He had met Rush, and at first they had butted heads, but eventually they seemed to get along, especially when Rush realized he could use Nestor to do his dirty work. Rush and Nestor had a relationship behind the scenes that no one knew about. It was something Nestor kept secret, and Rush did too. Rush helped Nestor experiment with the homosexual feelings he had so long repressed, and he loved it. Rush didn't really care about anyone except himself, yet when Nestor made love to him, he felt absolute euphoria. And now in Nestor's eyes, Rush and him were now running the prison. And now, with this new law the president outlined in his speech, Nestor could commit as many violent acts as he wanted, and he would feel like a fool to let such a great gift go to waste. Chapter 7. Deidre's Secret. Georgina felt constant paranoia. An officer had informed them of what was to begin in the next few days. The prisoners would be allowed to do whatever they wanted, including killing each other for a week. If any of them lived to see the week's end, they would be free with their sentence suspended. It was like the movie The Purge, and it truly seemed like the world was moving in that general direction. She tried reasoning with herself that they could just decide not to kill, but she quickly berated herself for being so stupid. She was in prison with people who literally got off on hurting others. There was no way that any of them would survive a week. They would all most likely be dead within a few days. Guards came in and brought in cans of food, with Georgina assuming they were resources and rations for when this prison purge began. These were limited, of course, no more than 100 cans of God knows what, for roughly 1,000 people on the ladies' side of the prison. This only worsened the feeling of dread inside Georgina's stomach. They were all going to die, whether they liked it or not. Georgina went with Deidre and Augusta to scout out various areas of the prison to find possible hiding spots. Deidre said she knew a spot, much to Georgina's glee. They went during nighttime when everyone else was asleep. The guards kept a watchful eye, of course, but they didn't seem to notice the three girls. Deidre was the reason Georgina and Augusta found the crawl space, which would later on be a hideaway, as well as a means of transportation between the two sides of the prison. The crawl space was located in the janitor's closet on the female side of the prison. "We can hide in here from the psychos above," Deidre said. Georgina smiled. "The only thing is, one of us will have to stay up here so someone can pull the shelf above the crawl space entrance to hide it," Deidre said while pointing at a nearby shelf that had been scooted over to show the girls the crawl space door. The girls left, looking and making sure no one had seen their discovery. The girls agreed to look for more possible hiding spots tomorrow with Sherry, and they all went to sleep. Chapter 8. Theo. Theo Jones didn't dare defy Rush, but only because he was terrified of him. He had seen what Rush did to others, and he had felt what Rush had done to him. Ever since Rush had hurt Theo, he couldn't ever look at broom handles the same. Why did Rush hurt Theo? Theo didn't want to conform to his rules, so Rush shoved a broom handle where the sun doesn't shine. He was shitting blood for weeks. Theo planned on killing Rush eventually. He just wasn't sure how to go about doing it, especially since he had Nestor, Holt, and all of his brainless followers. Rush thought Theo was one of those brainless followers, but he was far from it. Theo hid his disdain, while Teddy Bear made a point to express his hatred towards Rush. Theo admired Teddy Bear for that. One thing that stuck in Theo's mind was the grin on Nestor's face as Rush did what he had done to Theo. He enjoyed Theo's suffering. He would remember that. After hearing what the president said about the prisoners being able to kill each other, Theo knew the road ahead would be bumpy, and he was terrified. Nestor would kill, Holt would manipulate, and Rush would sit back, proud of the chaos he was causing with his mindless minions. But Theo knew if he was to strike against Rush, this week ahead would be the time to do it. Chapter 9. Dread. The 3 days leading up to the main event were grueling, and they flew by way too fast. Everyone knew what was coming, and they were dreading it. Most of the prisoners dreaded it, except Rush, Skinner, and Nestor, alongside many others who seemed to look forward to it. Hell, they were the main dogs on their separate sides of the prison. Why not be excited? They had everyone under their thumb. People like Georgina, Theo, and Teddy Bear had absolutely no idea whether they would survive a week or not, but they mainly thought they wouldn't live to see the week's end in this new harsh environment, and were slowly coming to terms with it. The guards locked up every prisoner at around noon that day, presumably to get them riled up when the game, if you will, started in 12 hours. Time. Then they placed blunt objects such as pipes, baseball bats, and tools all around the prison, before finally locking up for the night and leaving. The silence that filled the prison was unsettling, to say the least. You would hear chains clinking, someone coughing, whispers. Georgina sat in silence alongside Deidre, Augusta, and Sherry. They had nothing to talk about, plus it'd be idiotic to discuss their possible plans near their possible enemies come a few hours. Theo sat in his cell, watching the sunset shine through the prison windows on the ceiling. He wondered if it would be the very last sunset he would ever see. Charlie, on the other hand, was very excited. He was jabbering about how it was his God-given right to massacre everyone around him. Rush wanted to smash the bastard's head in to shut him up. Nestor felt that same urge, and when he thought about doing such an act, he began to tingle down there. Would it feel as good as the time he had killed his father? Eventually, the fluorescent lights kicked on within the prison once nightfall hit, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time. They had no question as to when it officially started, because their cell doors opened, as if on a timer. It was June 25th of 2030, midnight.